Hello, good evening and welcome to another video with me, Bee. Hope you've all had a good week and weekend. They all go a little bit too quickly, don't they? Anyway, without further ado, let's get into this week's video, because we all like a mystery. So join me for Spooky Mysteries. In December 2016, a CIA officer checked into the American Embassy's health office in Havana, suffering from nausea, headache and dizziness. Days later, 2 more CIA officers reported similar ailments. By late 2018, the number grew to 26 Americans and 13 Canadians experiencing nausea, hearing loss, vertigo, nosebleeds and focusing issues. In all the cases, victims claimed that the symptoms were triggered by a strange noise they'd heard at their homes or in hotel rooms. One person said the noise was high-pitched. Another described a beam of sound pointed into their rooms. Some insisted that the noise more closely resembled marbles rolling along the floor. The illness has confounded medical experts. Doctors at the University of Pennsylvania, who examined some of the victims, diagnosed concussion-like symptoms, but found no signs they'd suffered concussions. The American investigators still don't know who or what made the victims sick. Was it a new type of weapon? The CIA claims it doesn't know of any weaponry that could cause these symptoms. But what about ultrasound? One theory holds that a pair of covert eavesdropping devices, placed too close to each other by Cuban agents, may have inadvertently produced such a reaction, like the feedback you hear when someone stands too close to a microphone. But the FBI has found no evidence to substantiate that argument. In fact, ultrasound is above the range of human hearing. Recordings of the sounds from some of the victims only added to the confusion. 2 scientists who studied the recordings believe they captured the sound of lovelorn male crickets. One of the scientists, Alexander Stubbs, of the University of California, Berkeley, says the insects are incredibly loud. You can hear them from inside a diesel truck going 40 miles an hour on the highway. Still, the scientists had no idea why the sounds might lead to illness in humans. This is true, but then how to explain what happened in China? In May 2018, an American posted in the consulate in Guangzhou was diagnosed with the very same mystery illness. Ultimately, 15 Americans were evacuated. While the seemingly airborne cause of these brain injuries is still a mystery, the fallout is clear. The Americans removed 60% of their diplomats from Cuba and expelled 15 Cuban diplomats from Washington, D.C. The mysterious sounds may well be the opening shots in a new kind of Cold War. On November the 7th, 1872, a merchant ship with a cargo of denatured alcohol left New York Harbour for Genoa, Italy. The Mary Celeste sailed forth, helmed by Captain Benjamin Briggs and his hand-picked crew of 7 men. Accompanying the sailors were Briggs' wife and 2-year-old daughter. The ship and its crew spent 2 weeks at sea, fighting against raging storms and treacherous seas before reaching the Azores. Captain Briggs chronicled the rough journey in his journal, but curiously his log ended abruptly on November the 25th, 1872, at 5 a.m. The night prior, his log recalled, the ship and its crew had continued to face rough seas and winds of more than 35 knots, but by the morning they had come out on the other side unscathed, with the island of Santa Maria in sight. All, it seemed, was well. But when the crew of the De Gracia came across the Mary Celeste just over 1 week later, on December the 5th, they found it abandoned, drifting in the seas 400 miles east of the Azores. Captain David Morehouse sent a boarding party to investigate the Mary Celeste and found the ship in near perfect condition. Aside from a few feet of water in the ship's bilge, the lowest point of the ship, which rests beneath the waterline, things seemed to be mostly in order. A few charts had been tossed about below deck, but the crew's belongings were neatly tucked away, and the ship was stocked with enough food and water to last 6 months. The only thing missing was its crew. It made no sense that Briggs, an experienced seaman, would abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship. In fact, Daily Nautica reports Morehouse had dined with Briggs in New York just before each of the men and their respective crews set sail, and he considered the man to be a friend. He knew just how capable of a captain Briggs was. Morehouse and his crew towed the merchant ship with them to Gibraltar, where authorities conducted an investigation that ultimately yielded no conclusive results. At this point, several theories began to surface. English Inspector Frederick Flood was the first to hypothesise about the disappearance of the crew. With the knowledge that Morehouse and Briggs were friends, the inspector suspected that the two captains may have concocted a scheme to defraud the insurance company and split the profit earned from the eventual sale of the Mary Celeste. Per the laws of the sea, the abandoned ship did now belong to Morehouse after all. The inspector then theorised that Briggs had killed his crew and hidden himself away in the cargo hold of the Di Gratia. Flood's theory, however, was full of holes. Briggs had in fact held property shares in the ship, so he would have gained nothing from the scheme. The theory also failed to account for Briggs's wife and daughter. The crew of the Di Gratia eventually received payment. However, it was only 1/6 of the total $46,000 value of the Mary Celeste. Apparently, the authorities weren't totally convinced of their innocence. Additional theories suggested that the crew had got drunk off the ship's alcohol cargo and mutinied, but there were no signs of violence. Others said the ship must have been raided by pirates, yet no valuables were missing. The mystery may well have been left alone, had author Arthur Conan Doyle not written the 1884 short story J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement, a fictitious account of an ex-slave who captures a ship called the Mary Celeste. The story reignited interest in the ship, but as a theory, the story is entirely baseless. Naturally, stories of sea monsters became associated with the missing crew, as did explanations of waterspouts, and much later, extraterrestrial abduction. Yet for all of these theories, none of the evidence ever matched. Perhaps the most plausible theory was that vapours from the alcohol had blown the hatch cover off. Then, fearing fire, the crew abandoned the ship. However, the hatch cover was securely fastened, once again leaving no feasible explanation. The Mary Celeste was sailed for about 12 years after it was found abandoned, and then it hit the Rochelaise Reef off the coast of Haiti, where it became stuck. What is left of the ship is still there today. The shipwreck was located in 2001 and has been historically authenticated. On the 23rd of January 1959, a group was formed for a skiing expedition across the northern Urals in the then Soviet Union. Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute, the leader, assembled a group of 8 others for the trip. Most of these were fellow students and peers who had all become friends. Each member of the group was an experienced Grade 2 hiker with ski tour experience and would be receiving Grade 3 certification upon their return. Their names were Yuri Doroshenko, Ludmila Dubinina, Igor Dyatlov, Alexander Kolovatov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Yuri Krivonchenko, Rustam Slobodin, Nikolay Thibault-Brignol, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Yuri Yudin. The trip kicked off on a good note according to Kolmogorova, a fifth-year radio engineering major at UPI, who had written as much in the group's joint journal. The group kept a handful of diaries throughout the trip, in addition to a series of cameras. The mood on the train was reportedly cheery, and photos of the hikers before the Dyatlov Pass incident occurred proved as much. On January the 26th, 1959, the hikers hitched a 3-hour ride on the back of a truck from Viger to the District 41 logging site. Yuri Yudin experienced sciatica at this point and chose to leave the group and head back home. That decision ended up saving his life. The next day, the rest of the group continued their journey by foot up the mountains. According to the journal entries on February the 1st, the hikers made their way out late in the day. The route they had chosen had been remarkably difficult, even for them. They walked 2.5 miles before pitching their tent on a slope of Kholat Syakhl, just 10 miles away from Mount Otterton, where they were headed, according to their last journal entry and final photographs. Before leaving, Dyatlov had agreed he would send a telegram to their sports club as soon as the group returned to Viger. It was expected that this would happen no later than the 12th of February, but Dyatlov had told Yudin before he departed from the group that he expected it to be longer. When the 12th passed and no messages had been received, there was no immediate reaction, as delays of a few days were common with such expeditions. On the 20th of February, the travellers' relatives demanded a rescue operation, and the head of the institute sent the first rescue groups, consisting of volunteer students and teachers. Later, the army and police forces became involved, with planes and helicopters ordered to join the operation. On the 26th of February, the searchers found the group's abandoned and badly damaged tent on Kholat Syakhl. The campsite baffled the search party. Mikhail Sharavin, the student who found the tent, said, "The tent was half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind." Investigators said the tent had been cut open from the inside. 9 sets of footprints, left by people wearing only socks, a single shoe, or even barefoot, could be followed, leading down to the edge of a nearby wood on the opposite side of the pass. After 500 metres, these tracks were covered with snow. At the forest's edge, under a large Siberian pine, the searchers found the visible remains of a small fire. There were the first 2 bodies, those of Krivnishenko and Doroshenko, shoeless and dressed only in underwear. The branches of the tree were broken up to 5 metres high, suggesting that one of the skiers had climbed up to look for something, perhaps the camp. Between the pine and the camp, the searchers found 3 more corpses, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova and Slobodin, who died in poses suggesting that they were attempting to return to the tent. They were found at distances of 300, 480 and 630 metres from the tree. Finding the remaining 4 travellers took more than 2 months. They were finally found on the 4th of May under 4 metres of snow in a ravine 75 metres further into the woods from the pine tree. 3 of the 4 were better dressed than the others, and there were signs that some clothing of those who had died first had been removed for use by the others. Dubinina was wearing Krivnishenko's burned, torn trousers, and her left foot and shin were wrapped in a torn jacket. A legal inquest started immediately after the first 5 bodies were found. A medical examination found no injuries that might have led to their deaths, and it was concluded that they had all died of hypothermia. Slobodin had a small crack in his skull, but it was not thought to be a fatal wound. An examination of the 4 bodies found in May shifted the narrative of the incident. 3 of the hikers had fatal injuries. Thibaut Brignol had major skull damage, and Dubinina and Zolotaryov had major chest fractures. According to the report, the force required to cause such damage would have been extremely high, comparable to that of a car crash. Notably, the bodies had no external wounds associated with the bone fractures, as if they had been subjected to a high level of pressure. All 4 bodies found at the bottom of the creek in a stream of running water had soft tissue damage to their head and face. For example, Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, part of the lips, as well as facial tissue and a fragment of skull bone, while Zolotaryov had his eyeballs missing, and Alexander Kolivatov had his eyebrows missing. There was initial speculation that the indigenous Mansi people, reindeer herders local to the area, had attacked and murdered the group for encroaching upon their lands. Several Mansi were interrogated, but the investigation indicated that the nature of the deaths did not support this hypothesis. Only the hikers' footprints were visible, and they showed no sign of hand-to-hand struggle. Although the temperature was very low, around -25 to -30 Celsius, with a storm blowing, the dead were only partially dressed. Some had only one shoe, while others wore only socks. Some were found wrapped in snips of ripped clothes that seemed to have been cut from those who were already dead. Journalists reporting on the available parts of the inquest files claim that it states, 6 of the group members died of hypothermia and 3 of fatal injuries. There were no indications of other people nearby on Kholat Syakhl, apart from the 9 travellers. The tent had been ripped open from within. The victims had died 6 to 8 hours after their last meal. Traces from the camp showed that all group members left the campsite of their own accord, on foot. Some levels of radiation were found on one victim's clothing. To dispel the theory of an attack by the indigenous Mansi people, it was stated that the fatal injuries of the 3 bodies could not have been caused by human beings, because the force of the blows had been too strong and no soft tissue had been damaged. Released documents contained no information about the condition of the skiers' internal organs, and there were no survivors. At the time, the official conclusion was that the group members had died because of a compelling natural force. The inquest officially ceased in May 1959 as a result of the absence of a guilty party. The files were sent to a secret archive. On the 11th of July 2020, Andrei Kuryakov, Deputy Head of the Urals Federal District Directorate of the Prosecutor General's Office, announced an avalanche to be the official cause of death for the Dyatlov Group in 1959. Later independent computer simulation and analysis by Swiss researchers also suggest avalanche as the cause. Summarising Kuryakov's report in The New Yorker, Douglas Preston writes, "The most appealing aspect of Kuryakov's scenario is that the Dyatlov Party's actions no longer seem irrational. The snow slab would probably have made loud cracks and rumbles as it fell across the tent, making an avalanche seem imminent. Kuryakov noted that although the skiers had made an error in the placement of their tent, everything they did subsequently was textbook. They conducted an emergency evacuation to ground that would be safe from an avalanche. They took shelter in the woods. They started a fire. They dug a snow cave. Had they been less experienced, they might have remained near the tent, dug it out and survived. But avalanches are by far the biggest risk in the mountains in winter, and the more experience you have, the more you fear them. The skiers' expertise doomed them." Evidence contradicting the avalanche theory includes: the location of the incident did not have any obvious signs of an avalanche having taken place. An avalanche would have left certain patterns and debris distributed over a wide area. The bodies found within a month of the event were covered with a very shallow layer of snow, and had there been an avalanche of sufficient strength to sweep away the second party, these bodies would have been swept away as well. This would have caused more serious and different injuries in the process, and would have damaged the tree line. Over 100 expeditions to the region had been held since the incident, and none of them ever reported conditions that might create an avalanche. A study of the area, using up-to-date terrain-related physics, revealed that the location was entirely unlikely for such an avalanche to have occurred. The dangerous conditions found in another nearby area, which had significantly steeper slopes and cornices, were observed in April and May, when the snowfalls of winter were melting. During February, when the incident occurred, there were no such conditions. An analysis of the terrain and the slope showed that even if there could have been a very specific avalanche that found its way into the area, its path would have gone past the tent. The tent had collapsed from the side, but not in a horizontal direction. Dyatlov was an experienced skier, and the much older Zolotaryov was studying for his master's certificate in ski instruction and mountain hiking. Neither of these 2 men would have been likely to camp anywhere in the path of a potential avalanche. Footprint patterns leading away from the tent were inconsistent with someone, let alone a group of 9 people, running in panic from either real or imagined danger. All the footprints leading away from the tent and towards the woods were consistent with individuals who were walking at a normal pace. Theories abound as to how this experienced group lost their lives, and here are some of them. 2 members of the Dyatlov group have been the focus of particular speculation. Why was Semyon Zolotaryov, a 37-year-old veteran of World War II, attached to this group of young students and graduates? Furthermore, is it significant that a few years earlier, Yuri Krivnichenko helped clear up a radioactive leak at a secret Soviet nuclear facility, an incident which has since been compared to the Chernobyl disaster? According to one theory, Zolotaryov and Krivnichenko, and potentially a third hiker, were working for the KGB and had joined the Dyatlov Trek to rendezvous with CIA agents in the Ural Mountains. While handing over radioactive materials and fake nuclear secrets, the Russians were supposed to take photos of the American agents. The theory goes that the CIA men got wise to what was going on, leading to a fight breaking out and the eventual massacre of the Dyatlov party. In 1990, Lev Ivanov, the man who led the initial investigation into the incident, published a sensational article claiming he'd been ordered to censor some of his key findings. In particular, the unusual char marks on the trees near where the bodies were found, which in Ivanov's view confirmed a source of heat ray that had been purposefully aimed at some of the helpless hikers. His article also alleged that floating balls of light and other weird phenomena had been reported over the Ural Mountains in February. Ivanov doesn't mince his words, saying that, based on the evidence gathered, the role of UFOs in this tragedy was quite obvious. Whether these supposed UFOs were of alien origin or were experimental Soviet weapons depends on which version of this theory you believe. The idea that the group was killed by a Yeti rests on a few pieces of dubious evidence. The first is a photo taken by one of the doomed hikers, which shows a dark humanoid figure seemingly skulking by a tree. But was this a fearsome figure from the annals of cryptozoology, or simply a blurry image of another hiker? The second item cited by pro-Yeti theorists is a parody newspaper the hikers wrote during the expedition, which contained the line, "The Yeti lives in the northern Urals, near Mount Autoton." While this was clearly intended as a joke, other stories in the parody newspaper were exaggerated accounts of the things the hikers really did. So, according to this theory, the satirical entry on the Yeti was inspired by a real sighting of the creature, which stalked and eventually killed the entire group. Russian investigative journalist Svetlana Oss wrote in her book Don't Go There that she believed local hunters murdered the hikers while high on psychedelic mushrooms. A Russian news station also theorised that all was not well within the group. Perhaps one hiker turned against the others in a fit of rage. But the coroner said no human being would possess the strength to inflict the damage he found on their bodies. With the Soviet Union in the grip of a Cold War with the West, suspicion began to grow that the young hikers had fallen victim to a military test. In such a scenario, USSR forces were testing weapons in the remote Urals, unaware people were asleep on the slopes of Dead Mountain. Some experts thought a test involving radioactive weapons could explain the burns on some of the victims and the radiation on their possessions, but others pointed out that they may have burned themselves trying to light a fire in the forest to keep warm after they abandoned the tent. The contamination of their clothing could also be explained away by the presence of the chemical thorium in their gas lanterns. Parachute mines, which explode in the air, are known to cause the kind of devastating internal injuries suffered by the hikers. The most vocal proponent of the parachute mine theory was the survivor, Yuri Yudin. When the hikers set out, they were initially a group of 10, but Yuri's chronic joint issues flared up in the snow, and he turned back 5 days before disaster struck. Until he died in 2013, Yuri insisted his friends were accidentally killed by powerful weapons. For some who have studied the tragedy, the pieces of the puzzle still don't fit perfectly together. The hikers never did reach the ridge they were climbing towards, but today it bears their name. The Dyatlov Pass honours the group's leader, 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, who planned the ill-fated expedition for his friends. Whatever occurred on that fateful day we can only speculate, as it will forever remain a mystery, known only to the party of 9, who tragically took the cause to their graves. The Dyatlov Pass incidents always fascinated and puzzled me. There are so many inconsistencies and conflicting theories, and even some of the scientific studies don't seem to stand up to scrutiny. But I, for one, shall forever wonder what happened up there on Kholat Syakhl, and I'm sure many more people will too. On November the 24th, 1971, Dan Cooper was a passenger on Northwest Airlines Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle, a 30-minute flight. He was described by passengers and flight attendants as a man in his mid-40s, wearing a dark suit, black tie with a mother-of-pearl tie clip, and a neatly pressed white-collared shirt. He took his seat, lit a cigarette, and politely ordered a bourbon and soda, for which he paid cash. Shortly after takeoff, he handed a note to a 23-year-old flight attendant, who ignored it, assuming it was just the man's phone number. "Miss, you better look at that note," Dan Cooper told her. "I have a bomb." The note's exact wording is part of the mystery, since Cooper reclaimed it after the flight attendant read it, but his demands were for $200,000 in negotiable American currency, worth $1 million today, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane on arrival. The flight attendant brought the demands to the captain. The airline's president authorised full cooperation. The other passengers had no idea what was happening, having been told that landing was delayed due to mechanical difficulties. At 5:39 p.m, the plane landed. An airline employee delivered a cash-filled knapsack and parachutes, and Cooper allowed all passengers and 2 flight attendants to leave the plane. During refuelling, Cooper outlined his plan to the crew: a southeasterly course toward Mexico, with 1 further refuelling stop in Nevada. 2 hours later, the plane took off. When it landed in Reno, Cooper's absence was noted. Cooper, whom the media mistakenly referred to as D.B. Cooper, was never seen or heard from again. No parachute was found, and the ransom money was never used. In 1980, a young boy on vacation with his family in Oregon found several packets of the ransom money, identifiable by serial number, leading to an intense search of the area for Cooper or his remains. Nothing was ever found. A parachute strap was found in 2017 at one of Cooper's possible landing sites. What happened to Dan Cooper and the remaining money remains a mystery to this day. And that brings us to the end of the video for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been lovely to see you. I have a little video to play because my first live stream of 2 is on Tuesday at 8 p.m. So, here's the video. So there you have it, folks. Tuesday, 8 p.m, 28th of February. Don't forget to tune in. So, until next time, take care of yourselves, be safe, and don't forget, stay spooky.